morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Perfect.
Morning, Amy. Wow, sound is
Morning.
super loud.
Oh, it wasn't loud on my end, but I guess my volume is not turned all the way up.
You must be on the wrong speakers. Hmm. Can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, that's better on my end. Thank you.
Hey, Kathy, I'm going to make
Hi.
sure that mine's working.
It sounds great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good to see you. Oops. Morning, Tom. We'll give folks just a couple more minutes to join. I don't know if others found this, but the getting on the WebEx was a little different for me this morning, and I'm also having some challenges with my video. So apologies for being offline or off video. See what I can do about it. Oh. Oop. There we go. One word.
Catherine, morning. It's Andrea from Oregon Housing. It's nice to know that it wasn't just my own technical abilities or lack thereof this morning that manifested. So I appreciate that. And good to see everybody.
Good to see you. Thanks. We're just giving people a few more minutes to join. Hmm. It looks like we have a critical mass. So I'd like to, good morning. I'd like to call the April 11th, 2025 meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission to order. And welcome to members of the commission and of the public. Thank you for joining our meeting today. I also noticed Karin Power from the governor's office, who has joined us as well. Welcome. We have 3 new commission members with us today who I'll introduce shortly. But if we could go to the next slide, I'd like to ask Jen just to quickly review how people use WebEx.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the meeting. Here is a quick overview as WebEx. As panelists, you are able to mute and unmute yourself, as well as turn on your camera as you wish and raising your hand. Once you raise your hand, please click on the hand icon again to lower your hand. You also have the option to send a private message to anyone in this meeting. As an attendee, you only have the option to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. You were a little quiet there, so you might want to just speak up the next time, or if you weigh in again. Thank you, but I appreciate that. Next slide, please. So we have a full agenda today. We've got a lot of interesting discussions that we'll be having. After our opening remarks and the introduction of new commissioners and updates, We'll discuss how changes at the federal level are impacting Oregon's climate work. This agenda item came out of a discussion at our last meeting. And folks were interested in hearing from the agencies about the impacts of changes in federal funding. We want to broaden this out just a little bit to also recognize that a recent executive order that came out a few days ago from President Trump that is focused on state climate action, and we'll add that to that agenda item. Following that, we'll hear a presentation on Oregon Department of Energy's work to develop the Oregon Energy Strategy. And then we'll hear a brief update on what's happening in the legislative session, followed by public comments. Finally, we're going to take a deeper dive, and we have three great speakers. Jason Searman from Oregon Department of Energy, Nicole Hughes, who's the Executive Director of Renewable Northwest, and our own Representative Gamba, who are all three going to be talking to us about transmission. And then we'll close the meeting out and kind of think about our next meeting and other next steps that come out of this. So if we could go to the next slide, please. With that, I'd like to welcome our new commission members, Bettina Von Hagen, who is founder and CEO of EFM, and EFM holds more than 200,000 acres of forest land. Formerly, Bettina was the VP for Forestry and Ecosystem Services at EcoTrust. Louis Lem, Bettina will be filling our forestry seat. And then Louis Lem, who is the Transportation Programs Manager at the Port of Portland. He has extensive background in urban planning and with multimodal transportation planning and analysis. He's going to be filling our transportation seat. And then those are both voting members. And then Greg Dodson, who is an associate professor at University of Oregon's Law School, where he teaches environmental law, climate change law, and policy and energy law, will be filling one of our at-large non-voting seats. And he previously held staff positions with the Senate and House, the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives. So welcome to all three of you. I'm really pleased to have you join the commission. We're very fortunate to have you on, and I just wanted to welcome you to say a few words on what motivated you to join the commission. So open it up to whoever would like to say a few words. Louis. Commissioner Lem.
Good morning, and thank you, Catherine, and fellow members of the commission. I just wanted to introduce myself and say how much I appreciate having the opportunity to work with you all. I've been learning about and following the work of the Oregon Climate Action Commission, and just really enthusiastically I'm happy to be seeing all the great work that's been happening. And so I'm just happy to be a part of this group. I'll just say a little bit about my background, if that's helpful.
That'd be great.
I've been working in transportation for most of my career. I've also had an overlapping area of work around climate change and transportation energy. I've worked for the federal government earlier in my career. I worked in the EPA in the earlier administration. I've worked in the private sector, both as a consultant and with the American Automobile Association, the Auto Club of Northern California, Nevada, and Utah. And currently I'm working at the Port of Portland. And so the Port of Portland is very much a multimodal transportation agency. We're very involved in trade and transportation and the movement of goods and people for the benefit of Oregon and the residents and the economy of Oregon. So again, I'm just very happy to be here and so happy that so much good work is going on. Thank you.
Thank you. We are very fortunate to have you. Greg, I saw your hand go up.
Sure. I'm happy to take just to say a couple words, which is, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join all of you and work with you going forward. I do think, like Lim, that this is really important work that you're doing, and it's going to be kind of I think it's going to be a place where a lot of positive action can happen, even as we might hear discouraging things from elsewhere. So I'm really excited about it. My background is that I have done a lot of energy, environmental, and specifically climate change policy work over the years, both in the U.S. House of Representatives with the committee that has jurisdiction over those matters, and also in the U.S. Senate more recently, where I took a leave of absence from teaching at the law school to work on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which have significant climate change components. So I've been teaching at the law school since 2017 on these issues and publish on climate change related issues. And I'm just very excited to be a part of this and help in any way that I can. So thank you.
Your recent experience and long history will be very helpful at this, especially at this time. I don't see Commissioner Von Hagen on yet. We were corresponding this morning, so we can, when she joins us, we can have her say a few words if she'd like. We are still recruiting for 2 at-large voting positions and 2 at-large non-voting positions. So that is an active and ongoing to fill a few more seats, but really pleased to have these 3 new members to the commission. So if we could go to the next slide. And I will just give some of my updates and then an update for me, and then I'm happy to open the floor to updates from other commissioners. So we have I wanted to update you on our natural and working lands work. And first and foremost, I want to thank Liz and Jason and the other climate team members. They've been up to their ears to advance the natural and working lands deliverable work streams over the last 5 months, and they're just doing a great job at that. I also wanted to recognize the fund agencies, the natural and working fund agencies, who have made really great strides on the projects that the commission invested in January of 2024. And in addition, the leads at these fund agencies have been working with Liz to think through the process and potential investments should we be lucky enough to get additional funds for the next biennium as they were included in the governor's budget. To get input on how we might invest the next round of funding, we are opening a public comment period that will run through May 2nd. And we're hoping to get input from the public on just perspectives on the relative priorities of the criteria in House Bill 3409, in particular in section 54.3, I believe, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong. We also want to get input on the types of natural climate solutions activities, for example, estuary restoration or reforestation, that folks think that we should be prioritizing and considering. Third, we'd love to hear about the types of investments that are needed. For example, technical assistance, landowner incentives, and research, which are all eligible uses of the funds. And then also if people have ideas about geographies that they think in particular need to get some focus, that would be great to hear as well. After the close on May 2nd, we'll summarize the results and those will be provided to the commissioners, and we'll post those as well. We do anticipate hearing from the fund agencies and hopefully getting, if we're in position to start to invest again in 2025. We'll hear a draft investment portfolio at our July meeting and move quickly to approve that and hopefully to get those funds on the ground just as quickly as possible. So that's my update. I did also want to thank Director Sharpillo Hansen, who invited me and a couple of the fund agencies to come and present to the Board of Agriculture. It was great to have that opportunity to engage the Board of Agriculture, and also very interesting to hear the different issues that were in front of the Board of Agriculture at their last meeting. So really wanted to thank you for inviting us to that meeting. Next slide, please. Well, we can, before we dive into our next agenda item, I'll just open the floor to any other comments that commissioners want to make, any updates.
Kathy, I'll just come off to say, I think Bettina is on the line now and she had her hand raised earlier.
Great.
So
Yes, great, thank you. Commissioner Von Hagen, welcome. I introduced you a bit ago, but I also just wanted to give you an opportunity to say a little bit about what motivated you to join the commission. Looks like you're still on mute. Perhaps I'm working out some challenges with the technologies. Why don't we go ahead and turn to Edith from the Oregon Department of Energy, have her do her presentation. Jen, if you could work with Bettina to try and resolve whatever technical issues she might be having. If you can be of assistance, then between this agenda item and the next, we can introduce her. Does anybody else want to give an update before we move on to our next agenda item?
Chair McDonald, did you want a few of the directors to talk about federal funding? Or are we going to do
That's
the energy strategy first?
We're going to do that first.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're right. Apologies. Thanks for raising that. We are planning on starting with our federal funding and other changes at the federal level. Thank you. Let me just make sure.
Okay.
That anyone else wants to make general updates before we go there.
Chair McDonald, I think Commissioner Von Hagen is unmuted.
Oh, excellent. I don't know if you were able to hear me earlier, but we'd love to have you just say a few words about what motivated you to join the commission. It looks like you're off mute, but we can't see you. Tina? We'll come back to you, Bettina. It sounds like you're still having some technical difficulties. WebEx is not used as often as some of the other platforms, and it can be challenging for a first-time user. Yeah, thanks for taking the slides down. Before we go to the federal funding and executive order discussion, Commissioner Apter.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. This isn't really an update, but I think just building off of your comment earlier around the latest federal executive order, I think we'll talk later in the agenda today about future discussion items for the commission, and I do want to make sure this continues to be elevated. Of course, we've seen a number of executive orders addressing and attacking climate and environmental justice, but as I think folks know, this one specifically goes after state climate policy. We should be seeing more over the next 60 days or potentially in 60 days, which is when the executive order directs the federal attorney general to identify additional actions related to particular state policies. So appreciate you flagging that. Hopefully folks saw some of the good local coverage of that most recent executive order. And I'll also drop in what I thought was a helpful resource from the Sabin Center, just kind of going through what exactly this executive order does and in what ways it is unconstitutional.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. And I did, before we go to the agency directors that I invited to kind of speak to the federal funding and the executive order and potential impacts on Oregon's climate action, it sounds like where all systems go with Commissioner Von Hagen. So I just welcome you. Thank you for joining the commission. And if you want to share a few words about what motivated you to do so.
Great. Well, I just showed my great competence by not being able to sign into WebEx. So hello, everybody. I did hear, I was listening since the beginning. So I heard all of your introductions. So thank you. Yeah, very happy to join this commission. I work with EFM, which is a forest investment company. We have, as Kathy mentioned, 200,000 acres of forests, but more important, we're climate motivated. We have, I think, the longest running voluntary project in Oregon in climate, and just signed a big deal with Meta to help facilitate the transition from short rotation forestry to long rotation forestry, using carbon as a financing tool to enable us to really help forests be healthy and produce high quality timber over the long term. But outside of forest and natural climate solutions, obviously, which is only one part of the solution, I'm just really thrilled to be part of a commission that's looking at the whole spectrum of activities, from avoiding emissions to sequestration. So thrilled to be part of this. Thank you for being invited, and look forward to working with you, and hope to be more technologically competent in the future. Although I swear to God, I had the password and then I don't know if it flipped on me or what happened, but maybe somebody can explain that to me later. Maybe there's a secret code.
Thank you, Commissioner Von Hagen. I had a few difficulties myself this morning, so something worked a little differently. And I'm having trouble with my video too. So anyway, but.
You have a halo around you.
Well, that's a plus side then. So with that, we will transition to our first topic, which we'll discuss and follow up on kind of some of the changes that are happening at the federal level and what impacts that has had and may have in the future on Oregon's climate action work. As Commissioner Apter mentioned, this new executive order was just announced on the 8th, and it is specifically focused on state climate action. And so that's kind of created a new wrinkle since our last meeting. I invited Director Benner, Director Sharpillo Hansen, and Director O'Brien, and Stephanie Page is standing in for Director O'Brien from OWEB to kind of speak to different ways the changes in federal funding in particular, but also this executive order might affect our work going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Benner.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. Happy to start this conversation, and I know there's a lot of directors here who have things to say in addition to Lisa and Stephanie, and then probably many others with thoughts about what's happening on the federal level. So for the Oregon Department of Energy, under the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we've been fortunate to be awarded numerous grants. I think I was going to look up the number this morning and I didn't have time, but over $250 million in grants. And this funding is helping to lower the cost of the clean energy transition for Oregonians by supporting families in purchasing clean energy technologies like heat pumps and solar panels. It helps support communities in installing EV chargers and microgrids. And then there's programs to make homes and businesses more resilient. So this funding has really enabled us to engage with and assist communities like we never have before. And I think Oregonians around the state are really counting on the money that the federal government has awarded Oregon and for which we have contracts in place. As we've talked about before, the new administration has paused some grants and then restarted them, and it's discontinued others. To paraphrase, it's a very fluid situation, like so many other things on the federal side these days. And I can say right now, on the positive side, all of the federal grants for which Odo has contracts in place with the federal government are currently moving forward. So we've been able to process invoices for programs that are up and running, and we're continuing to move forward on planning for programs that have yet to launch, assuming the money will continue to be there. Unfortunately, we are anticipating some delays as the federal agencies get rid of staff and close offices. They're really losing so much capacity and institutional knowledge, and we assume that this is going to have an effect on their ability to get funding to the states. So the on-again, off-again funding for these programs really makes it difficult for Odo and our partners to plan. Again, the funding appears to be available now, but we're aware that it could change anytime. And it's really just kind of a part of what this administration is doing in terms of trying to reverse progress on climate change. And we've all, in the past, really, we're lucky to have the federal government as a partner in moving us forward with, laws and rules and funding at the federal level. They've pulled back now from that partnership. And the way I've been thinking about it is they've gone from being a wind at our backs to a headwind. Now, there are a lot of other things pushing the clean energy economy forward that's going to be hard for the administration to roll back. The market, corporate policies, technology advancements. So I think while their actions are making it more difficult, I think they may slow down the clean energy transition, but I don't see it stopping here in Oregon. And I will, just because Kathy mentioned it, jump to the recent executive order that has gotten some attention, the one called Protecting American Energy from State Overreach. As Nora said, this is sort of beyond not assisting us in getting to actually trying to thwart states. So for those who haven't read it, some language, it seeks to, quote, remove illegitimate impediments to the identification, development, siting, production, investment in, or use of domestic energy resources. And as Nora mentioned, it asks the Attorney General to, quote, identify all state and local laws, regulations, causes of action, policies, and practices burdening the identification, development, siting, production, or use of energy resources that may be unconstitutional, preempted by federal law, or otherwise unenforceable. So people have been wondering what the impact might be. And I'm not sure, because I don't actually think the state has any laws and policies that are unconstitutional. Our state climate laws are constitutional, and our policies are drafted with an understanding of what the limits of state authority are. So until we see something more concrete, I'm not really sure there's much to do with this. I'm curious about what others on this call think, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm not aware of any authority that the U.S. Attorney General can just block any state laws they don't like. So from Odo's perspective, I think the best course of action that we can see is to continue moving forward on our prudent, practical actions to meet the state's goals. So that's my take on the EO. And I know that the governor has put out a statement. She's also committed to continuing Oregon's good work. Her statement, which you may have seen in the Oregonian, is about how combating climate change requires collaboration and long-term work, not deregulating polluters. The science is clear, climate change is real, and our state programs are critical to protecting our environment for generations to come. She says she'll continue to fight for the longstanding values of Oregonians, and her administration is coordinating with other states, remains committed to the clean energy transition, modernizing our energy grid, and helping lower energy bills for low-income consumers. So appreciate having her as a partner on this effort. And now I think Lisa Sharpelow Hansen is prepared to share what's happening at the Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Janine. I appreciate the introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I am Lisa Sharpelow Hansen from the Department of Ag. So in terms of federal funding at ODA, much like ODO, it's about uncertainty. We have been fortunate for the most part. We've had some stops and starts with some of our funding streams, but for the most part to the agency, money is continuing to come in. There are a lot of places though where we have significant concerns going forward. One, I think really that impacts working lands is in our plant protection and conservation program, where we do a lot of the survey work with funding from USDA APHIS. So, you know, looking for invasives, early detection, rapid response. We use federal funding for that, as well as federal funding in contracts for our weed control work. We haven't had a farm bill since 2018. And basically what we've seen over time is inflation has driven our costs up. USDA wants more work, but they don't want to pay for it, which is causing us to have to look at our projects contract by contract to determine if it will pay for the work that they're asking for. And in some cases, we have had to walk away from a couple of contracts. We've seen a reduction in funding for sudden oak death, which reaches across programs. So that just gives you a sense of it's an ongoing problem, not necessarily just with the situation with is funding on and off. It's congressionally not having a new farm bill and the cost of doing business just generally. I think the other places I would point to that are of concern looking forward, we've lost funding for our organic cost share. Not sure where that's going to go. We are anticipating funding to come in for our specialty crop block grant programs, but waiting for approval. The same with money that came to us for the Resilient Food Infrastructure System grants. We hear the money is coming, but we haven't seen it. And so for the most part, we're continuing on like, you know, it's coming, but uncertainty around it, and then definitely uncertainty for that funding into the future. Restructuring within the agencies, I think too, is a challenge. FDA is going through major restructuring, and it's impacting their alignment around food systems. We do work around the Food Safety Modernization Act. And on the produce side, we work with farmers to help them understand the act. We don't do the inspections for FDA. FDA does those in Oregon. We did not sign the contract for both outreach and inspections. But we know we're taking a 66% reduction in our funding for that outreach work moving forward. At the national level with NASDA, they are very concerned about what's going on in FDA and how it will impact the food system longer term. I think the other thing that I would mention, not grant related, not funding related, but it's the uncertainty around the tariffs. And whether that's, you know, the tariffs on our products going in and the loss of market. Oregon lost market during COVID because of supply chain issues. We haven't gained that back. We're special in terms of how we do it here and what we do, but products can be procured from other countries. And so once you lose foothold in a market, it's hard to get that back. The other thing for agriculture that's a significant concern are the retaliatory tariffs. You know, in terms of tariffs on inputs, retaliatory tariffs on products. So, you know, agriculture is a price taker as well. So if you think about input costs for machinery, parts, agricultural, any of the agricultural inputs, it drives cost up. And so just the concern about how that impacts the agricultural economy and local communities, and how they play into our overall health of the Oregon economy are things that we are watching, engaged in the conversations, and very concerned about. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions.
Commissioner Thorndike, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to ask?
That actually was a question relating to ODO funding.
Do you want to go ahead and ask that
Yeah,
question?
just real quickly, it was just like, we know, okay, the 250 million in grants that there have been contracts for, but was there additional funding anticipated under either the infrastructure bill or IRA that we will probably not be receiving? I guess is the question.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner, for the question. Sorry, I missed you earlier. There were a few additional grant opportunities that we have applied for, but don't know if and when we'll hear back, because that's going to be hard, easier for the administration to decide they don't want to fund. And then there are some opportunities that we were anticipating being made available in the future that, again, we're not quite sure if those are coming or not.
Oh, great. Yeah, I just wanted, I can emphasize too, I mean, our manufacturing business, small family manufacturing business has been able to take advantage of, some Energy Trust grants for lighting and for replacing, boring things like compressors with more efficient, and they really have paid off. So, I mean, it's a valuable program, and it really gets stuff done on the ground. So hopefully we'll keep that going. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Thorndike. I also just wanted to emphasize the point that Director Benner made about it's not just the funding, it's also loss of staff at the federal agencies. And we're expecting to hear big news about changes at the Forest Service, for example, that are probably today or tomorrow. So
well, I also wanted to assure the director that, not being a lawyer, I am a lawyer and I don't understand what in the world is going on either. So don't feel out of place.
Well, I see a hand up from our resident lawyer. Dodson, would you like to weigh in?
I just wanted to add to that it's a really important conversation that's happening here about grants and the uncertainty going forward. One other point is that tax changes that were made in IRA related to clean energy and climate, those all remain in effect. And people, will have that certainty for this tax year in all likelihood. On May 9th, we'll see text probably in Congress, proposed text about how to revise those tax credits. And so that'll be a moment to take stock of where we're headed.
Absolutely. And Alan, you wanted to make a point. I know you were recently back at the Department of Energy meeting and had some reflections, but also wondered if you wanted to make any comments.
Well, when we were back, Janine and I were back at NASIO, it was a lot of turmoil, a lot of uncertainty, and walked away from that kind of depressed about what was happening and moving forward. But then as I got back to Oregon, I reflected on that, and I came up with a couple of things about that, and it turned me much more positive about it. The first one was that while the federal government is stepping away from the partnership that we've had with them, the overall things that are moving us towards a clean energy transition, the market and what states are doing and what local governments are doing and what businesses are doing and how the public feels about it, are really the main drivers of what's happening. And the federal government's part of that. It is actually a small sliver of the pie. And if it goes away, that means that we just have to make up for that in the actions that we take at the state. So it made all the stuff that we're doing at the state level that much more important. Before I went to the NASIO in DC in February, I thought we were very important. Now I think we're very, very, very important in terms of moving this forward. So it just makes it a little bit more relevant, all the things that we do at the commission here and at ODO and other places, that the states are really where the driver is going to be, because the federal government is stepping away from our partnership.
Absolutely. Any commissioners, any questions for Director Shapiro Hanson? Yes. Director Bell.
Chair McDonald, I appreciated no specific question. I did want to get in the queue to offer a very brief update when the moment is right before we move on from the topic of federal updates.
Okay, you're welcome to go now, and then we'll turn to Deputy Director Page.
Perfect. Well, first off, morning, everybody. Good to see folks. Good to be in virtual community. There's a few things that I want to just create some collective visibility on, really from the intersection of a few things, recognizing that a couple of the key priorities of this commission is to protect the health and well-being of the people of Oregon, and then also to ensure that the state, our beloved state that we love and call home, remains vibrant and healthy. And I think, as all of us know, that is grounded in its people. At its most fundamental level, how are our people doing, and are our people able to be resilient to all of the ebbs and flows that take place? So in that note, I want to just name a few adjacent things from a housing perspective that are taking place, so that as we continue to have federal updates, that we can have a broader visibility and lane to understand how some of these changes are not only evolving from a policy perspective, but from a people perspective as well. So I think the first is that just with the pace and volume of change, I think one of the sort of virtues that has been really important for me in this department is to sort of discern where there is symbolism and or operational shift. And sometimes it's a little bit of both. But the first thing that I'll just say in that regard is, from a housing perspective, is the HUD Green Retrofit Program was eliminated. And I think that's really important, recognizing that a lot of our climate goals really are adjacent to and are directly connected to housing. And a lot of it is bedded in the details, a lot of the things that seem really mundane and boring. And so I see that as both a symbolic and operational indicator of the trajectory of what we can expect from a housing perspective. But I also think from a symbolic perspective, it also reflects the reality that states and localities will likely be the salvation in so many ways. And so whether we're looking for partnership or whether we're looking for advantageous opportunities at the federal level to move our work, I think it was mentioned from an earlier commissioner that much of the work that this commission in different form has been able to put in place, alignment with our values so that we can operationalize our values, will be critical. And I think states and localities will be the salvation. A little closer to home from just a people and everyday perspective, I would say maybe one of our kind of lesser known programs, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. I think we learned that the good folks that have been running that program in DC, that office was terminated. There's a lot of details I could say about the program, but I think the most fundamental and most critical things to know about that program is it provides assurance to people, to families, and to seniors that when it's sweltering in the summer, that you can crank on your AC with a little bit of assurance that you won't be facing utility shutoffs, and that you don't have to wear winter wear in your home when it's really cold. And so those programs, again, ones that have funny names and might be lesser known, are the things that I think often provide, dare I say, freedom. Freedom that when you go home, that you can actually fully enjoy and be safe in your home. And those sort of critical programs are not abstract. They directly impact quality of life for folks, particularly for seniors and for seniors that are on a struggling and fixed income. So with all of that to say, I would just assert a couple of things. The first one is it would be great to continue to keep this specific topic on the agenda, not only from a policy level, but also from a people perspective. When things are happening and they impact our people and the people of Oregon, I want to make sure that this commission has full visibility to that. And then the other thing that I would say is recognizing that we've got a broad set of expertise and housing is newer to this commission, that we can also see some of the other intersectional changes that are counter to and might make it a little bit tougher for us to operationalize the values that we espouse and work towards. So as we continue on with the conversation today and forthcoming, just want to make sure that we can continue to keep our lane as broad in view as possible, given that a lot of our work sometimes get heady, and that's appropriate and okay, and that we can also make sure that we don't lose sight of people and how their lives might be changing sooner than some of the policy things that might be forthcoming.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Director Bell. I just want to do a time check with Jeff. I believe our next agenda item is the speaker has got some time limitations. Are we okay to stay on a few more minutes on this topic to hear from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board? Jeff?
Chair, I think if we can keep it to 5 minutes, we should be okay.
Great. And then we can always come back to this topic later during the meeting and take more input and have more discussion, because I think we'll have a little bit more time later in the meeting. Deputy Director Page, welcome and thank you.
Great. Well, good morning, Chair McDonald and commissioners. As Chair McDonald mentioned, I'm the deputy at OWEB, and I'm here for our executive director, Sarah O'Brien. She is out and about touring and meeting with local grantees and partners today, so sends her regrets. So I'll just start by mentioning the strong connection with watershed health and natural climate solutions. I think that goes without saying for the group here today, but just wanted to emphasize that connection and say that meeting our watershed health goals in Oregon is dependent on an interrelationship between state agencies, private landowners and managers, tribes, and other public landowners and managers, including federal agencies. So they are really integral to that partnership, and we're very much interdependent on each other to accomplish watershed health goals in the state, like fish and wildlife habitat, healthy streams, clean water, and all of the community and economic benefits that come with that. In addition to being a part of that partnership, some of the ways federal agencies support it is to host projects on federal lands in partnership with local grantees. They serve on OWEB review teams. About a third of our technical review team members are from federal agencies. They participate in all lands planning efforts around the state. And then, of course, they provide critical funding sources for projects on public and private land. And some of that comes through OWEB. We administer federal funding. Much of that goes directly from the federal government, either to local grantee organizations or to tribes or to private landowners directly. But those funds are really important to be able to leverage state funds. Federal funds, besides supporting those organizations, help support local contractors who do the watershed restoration work, forest health improvement work, and so forth, that are part of the state's goals and OWEB's goals. So let me see here, just check in my notes. In terms of the funds that OWEB administers that come from the federal government, for the most part, we are continuing to process grantee payment requests for both our state and federal funded programs. We've asked the local grantee partners to keep invoicing us as they normally would unless they hear otherwise from us. And we have had a few instances where payment requests appear to be delayed. And we've heard that they will be coming, but haven't seen that at this point. I think another source of disruption to grantees is they might have planned to apply for a federal source of funding that they could use to match OWEB funds, or they might be waiting on federal payments to support part of a project that we've funded. And so we've just tried to recognize those instances and provide as much flexibility as we can. And then we've also heard from local grantees that disruptions in federal funding, whether that's an opportunity they were planning to apply for and hadn't applied for yet, and the notice of opportunity got pulled or waiting for reimbursement or so forth, that there have been disruptions like that. In some cases, it can be an existential threat to that local organization, and in other cases, it's a part of their budget. So it's really different depending on organization to organization and the work that they do. But I would say in general, we have a lot of concern on behalf of the local partners because, again, we're interdependent. We depend on them to put the watershed restoration work on the ground that helps accomplish the state goals. And they're, in many cases, our friends and longtime friends and colleagues because it's a small community here in the state. So just as you heard from the directors, it's continuing to evolve. It's a rapidly evolving situation. It's consuming a lot of bandwidth for local partners and the landowners and managers that they work with. It's consuming a lot of bandwidth for us to just keep track of what's changing, and we're just doing the best that we can to support those local partners and continue to deliver service.
Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate those comments. And I think your point about the impacts to local organizations is an important one. We do have to move on to our next topic, but I think we may have time to come back to this right afterward. And I would be interested to hear more questions and also hear from other agency directors about this important topic. So with that, let's go ahead and turn things over to Edith to talk to us about the Oregon Energy Strategy Development.
I don't know, maybe Alan, can you give me a thumbs up? I can see you on my screen. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
All right. I had some issues yesterday with my sound. So good morning, everyone. I'm Edith Bayer. I'm Energy Policy Team Lead over here at the Oregon Department of Energy. And I've really been appreciating the conversation up until now. So thank you. I think that kind of transitioning into the energy strategy is an appropriate thing to do following on this discussion, because really the energy strategy, the challenge that we face at ODO and leading up development of an energy strategy is really about how to craft a vision for our state that moves us towards our energy and climate goals. And in uncertain times, that's more important than ever. If we go to the next slide, I'm just going to give, I'm going to focus today on sort of a status update, what we're doing, what we're headed, where we're headed, and just kind of open it up to see what questions or comments you might all have and how we can best engage in this process. So starting point is House Bill 3630 directs the Oregon Department of Energy to lead development of an energy strategy. This really comes out of a need that our state has to have a shared vision of how we reach our climate and energy goals. In 2022, in our biennial energy report, we looked at other states and what they're doing around this area. And a lot of states already have an energy strategy. Washington published theirs in 2021. And we have climate laws and policies that kind of span the economy and cover different sectors, and different agencies and different actors are responsible for implementing those. But what you do in one area affects the other. And so we have House Bill 2021, 100% clean electricity for our state's largest utilities, the Climate Protection Program, and Executive Order 2004, which together kind of cover the whole landscape. And so our charge is to produce actionable recommendations on energy policies that will help us work on, build on all of the work that's happening, not just in regulation, but also in implementation to achieve our energy and climate goals while maintaining affordable, reliable, and resilient energy systems. And those last three pieces are increasingly difficult today: maintaining affordability, maintaining reliability, and resilience. If we go to the next slide, there are really three main elements to the energy strategy. This comes out of the bill, but it's also what you can expect to see in the report that we will submit to the governor and legislature by November 1st of this year. So first, there's a look into what the pathways are to achieve our policy objectives, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the modeling that we undertook with consultants to look at what those pathways would look like and what they would mean. We are now in the process of developing ideas for policy recommendations, and I'll also talk a little bit about that. And then engagement really underpins each step of the way in developing the energy strategy. And so in the final report, we'll describe how we engaged and what we did with what we heard. But I just want to also really emphasize that we've worked very hard to make sure that we're really engaging robustly throughout the development of the energy strategy. If we go to the next slide, please. So and if you could click again, I have some, maybe two more times, sorry, I meant to kind of take out the animations here, but so the process that we started with was a modeling exercise where we construct a reference scenario, this kind of red circle in the middle that's meant to represent a least cost path to achieving our energy and climate goals. And then we asked questions to see what changes if something is different. And those are the 6 scenarios you see around the center. So what if, for example, we rely more on distributed solar and batteries to meet our clean energy goals? What does that mean in terms of cost, in terms of what we need to build? What if we build less resources in Oregon and rely more on imports? What would that mean in terms of cost, for example? Or what if we slow down on electrification or on energy efficiency? And so all of these scenarios, the reference and the 6 scenarios, start with existing energy related policies, and all of them end with achieving Oregon's energy and climate goals. The time frame for this analysis was 2024 to 2050. And so we really undertook this analysis to understand what it would take and what different choices would mean. And when I say all scenarios end with achieving Oregon's energy and climate goals, we really anchored the analysis in those three things that I mentioned before: House Bill 2021, the Climate Protection Program, and the Executive Order 2004 as kind of anchor policies. So if you click one more time, we also had 3 sensitivities that we investigated. The difference here and why they're separate is really that there are 2 in there that do not meet current goals. So we had a really stringent rule that we needed to meet our climate goals, but when we started to go down the path of modeling, we decided to test out 2 things. One was what happens if Advanced Clean Trucks is not in place, just to understand what that would mean in terms of cost and across the economy. And then we also had a sensitivity where we looked at what if we do not meet our state's goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled by 20% per capita, vehicle miles traveled by 20% by 2050. And that kind of gave us a better understanding of the role that those policies play in meeting our broader objectives. I should mention too that in this process, we engaged pretty robustly. We worked closely with our colleagues at Odo, who were really deeply involved in the Oregon Climate Action Roadmap to 2030. And so the work that you all have been doing informed our modeling and our thinking and how we structured that, and continues to inform our thinking. So really appreciate the work that this group has done and continues to do. If we go to the next slide, so the modeling was framed, and those alternative scenarios were framed as what if questions. And so I just wanted to run through briefly so that you would get a sense of the kinds of questions that we asked and that we investigated in the modeling. I just want to make the point here that the modeling really serves to inform the policy discussions. The modeling results aren't the energy strategy in and of themselves, but these questions were really meant to, and I can say that have been fulfilling the purpose of helping to really dive in our policy working groups to understand where we need to be going and what the kind of challenges and barriers and solutions are to get there. So these are the questions that we asked and tested in the modeling on the demand side. What if energy efficiency in building electrification is delayed by 10 years? So this is relative to the reference scenario that had quite ambitious energy efficiency and if that kind of efficient electrification trajectory out to 2050. What if there were no electrification targets for medium and heavy duty vehicles through 2035? So that's that sensitivity that I mentioned where advanced clean trucks isn't, if we didn't have advanced clean trucks, what would happen? The third question here is what if reaching full zero emission vehicle sales shares for medium and heavy duty vehicles is delayed by 10 years from 2040 to 2050? So this kind of tests out once advanced clean trucks kind of runs through, what are the implications of different policy trajectories that we might take after that, and what would that look like? What if there's limited demand response participation? This was interesting to ask because as we get more electric loads on the system, more electric vehicles, more heat pumps, it's important to be really conscious of the peak times on the electricity system. And so we built in the reference scenario quite a lot of demand response to shift those loads off peak and save the system from having to build even more resources. And so what if we limit that? What happens? What if tech loads, so primarily data centers, were a little bit lower? So in our reference scenario, we built in pretty high data center growth. And here we ask the question of what if that data center growth is a little bit lower? What does that mean to the overall picture? And then the last one I've already mentioned, what if per capita VMT remained at today's levels until 2050? So if we go to the next slide, and I realize this is a lot of detail, so I'm kind of flying through it, but we have a lot of resources that we'd be really happy to share with you all after this, and always happy to have another conversation. So on the supply side, we asked a few additional questions. I've mentioned this first one already. What if there are higher levels of rooftop solar and behind the meter storage? And transmission is limited to reconductoring only. So no new transmission, no new greenfield transmission lines. What if there's limited utility scale electricity generation in Oregon? What does that do? We end up relying more on imports, but what does that mean in terms of cost? And what might an alternative portfolio of flexible resources for electricity reliability look like? That last one would take a while to explain in detail, but essentially it tests out how do we meet that kind of last mile of kind of electricity reliability. We need something that can meet system needs when hydro levels are low, renewables production is low, and we have a cold snap or a heat wave. You know, how do we meet that kind of last increment of demand where it's the hardest, that's the hardest to meet with clean resources? If we go to the next slide, this slide kind of boils down a complex modeling exercise into some key takeaways. And really the action that we need to see happens in these 4 areas across all of the scenarios that we modeled. It was a pretty consistent message. So first, energy efficiency is critical. The cleanest energy is the energy that you don't use. Electrification, efficient electrification of transportation and buildings and industrial processes where possible is also key to a least cost pathway. That of course has a clear tie-in to clean electricity because you want those electrons to be clean. And then low carbon fuels play an essential role, particularly in areas that continue to rely on fuels because they're difficult to electrify. So those are things coming out of our modeling and other studies that we've seen, like aviation, shipping, some industrial processes. And I just want to pause here to say that I think that the first 2 pillars here are really linked to what we heard from Directors Benner and Bell on the importance of putting people first. These are really the actions that focus on people, on kind of in wonky terms, the end use or the demand side of things, not just because they achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but because they help reduce energy burden, they help ensure comfortable, healthy homes. We're looking at that vehicle miles traveled question and how we expand transportation options. And so there's a really robust area in here for discussion and where we feel the weight of making sure that we provide valuable direction at a time of really high uncertainty when we know that that there are risks to funding of critical programs and to policies. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on the modeling results. So this is, if I were to show one slide from the modeling, this is the one that I would show. If you look at the left-hand bar, that represents 2024 and how we use electricity divided up by resource. And this is from our reference scenario. And the yellow represents electricity. And then you can kind of see that the other colored bands represent different kinds of mainly fossil fuels. And between 2024 and 2050, there are 2 things that I want to point out that are really interesting that are happening. First, we actually reduced the size of the overall energy sector by 22%. This is in a reference scenario with specific assumptions. So it's not a forecast. We're not saying this is what's going to happen, but this is what could happen. It includes the increased demands from data centers coming online, economic growth, population growth. All of that is happening, and we still reduce energy demand, and it's really because of that efficiency. And at the same time, because the most efficient technologies are often electric, and because electricity tends to be lower cost to decarbonize than fuels, we see a doubling of the size of the electricity sector. So it's really a fundamental shift in how we power our whole economy. And again, sets up a really robust discussion around what this means and how we achieve this. So if we go to the next slide, I break it down a little bit differently here. So this is the same slide, but now it's broken down by sector. And so the purple here are those tech loads, and you can see that that's the biggest driver of not just electricity. This is energy demand growth on our system. So it's not the energy transition, it's not electrification, it's data centers, and that's a really big challenge. The blue, if you click one more time and go to the next slide, transportation down in blue, you can see energy demand significantly decreasing. Again, this is energy, not electricity. You do see electricity demand growing with this electrification of transportation, but energy demand drops down because of the efficiency of those electric vehicles. And then if we go to the next slide, which just points out the yellow here, and in buildings, we also see a reduction in overall energy demand. And again, that's because of energy efficiency and not just electrification, but also things like weatherization of homes. So that's kind of the big picture. If we go to the next slide, to remember what's on the next slide, this just gives you a sense of how much we spend as a state historically as a percentage of GDP to power our energy system, and how much the model anticipates we would be paying with that vision that I've just shown. And I think there are a few things to point out here. First, we're not saying that climate policy is going to drive down costs at the level that you see with this curve. This curve also represents kind of a trend of declining costs with broader economic trends. And that's an easy conclusion to mix up. We're trading in global volatility in oil and gas markets for uncertainties about things like critical minerals and supply chains, and that of course has gotten more difficult. There's significant investment needed in electricity. So while the scope overall across the energy system is not unprecedented, we are shifting to a pretty unprecedented level of investment in electricity. And I just want to mention that we have next week a presentation that we'll be giving to understand what this transition means at a household level. We have an analysis we've been calling the energy wallet analysis to understand how shifts in technology might be seen from the perspective of a household budget and how much you're paying for not necessarily the fuels themselves, but how much is being paid for transportation to keep a home warm and cool and to power all those plug loads. We keep more money in state and in region, and we also are going to be undertaking a job study, and we'll have a follow-on workforce analysis to really help understand when we make this big economic shift, how we make sure that our workforce keeps up with it and benefits from it. If we go to the next slide, I'm almost done. I just want to point out that there are a number of key considerations the model can't take into account. A model is just a model. It can provide really helpful insights, super complex, but it doesn't get at a lot of the other areas that are very important when we talk about energy and the effects that energy has on things like cost. We are talking about feasibility, how quickly can we achieve these things? We're talking about land use considerations and natural resource impacts, energy burden and affordability, environmental justice, energy resilience, community benefits, and I've already mentioned economic and employment effects. So right now where we are is that we are, and if we go to the next slide, we're kind of deep in discussions in various venues. One of them where we do the deepest dive are our policy working groups. We started those policy working group discussions in early February, and we started with what do the modeling insights tell us? And we have several kind of issue briefs that summarize the modeling results and the key insights coming out of that modeling for each of the working groups. And then we started to talk about, well, okay, this is the trajectory that the modeling suggests we need to follow, and here's where we are today. So what are the barriers? What are the challenges to getting on that pathway? And now we're moving in those groups toward what are we already doing and what more might we need? What might we recommend in the energy strategy? And all of that is working towards having some draft recommendations for public input by the end of May. And then as I mentioned at the beginning, the final report is due to the governor and legislature on November 1st. So thanks so much. Sorry for the brain dump. I hope that this was interesting and helpful, and happy to answer questions and to share resources. We have a lot of information and are very happy to share that with anybody who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. That was fascinating, and you answered my first question, which was kind of the rest of the timeline. And Odo has a landing page for folks who can, on this project, where you can go to find information. Is that correct?
We do, and I can drop it into the chat in a moment.
That'd be great. Any questions for Edith? And you can just raise your hand, or it is a little hard to see people.
Hi, Director. It's Mark Gamba. I do have a question.
Great. Thank you, Representative Gamba.
Thank you, Director. It was fascinating. I'm curious in the modeling how you're thinking about our infrastructure capacity, specifically related to transmission. And then sort of in addition to that, when you mentioned, can we do this? Can we make this transmission simply with reconductoring and not need to do any new greenfield? Was your assumption that Bonneville would be engaging in that reconductoring?
Thank you. Thanks, Representative Gamba, for those questions. So I think I have to start by saying that this is not a transmission study and doesn't replace the need for transmission studies. And there are several underway. Of course, we have utilities planning in their IRPs. We have Bonneville working on their transmission strategy, and we have regional initiatives. So I just want to start off by saying that, and then describe what we did with transmission, what came out of the model. So we have a clear conclusion that we need to build transmission coming out of the analysis. However, the way that the analysis is structured, the analysis looks at the west-wide footprint, kind of the Western interconnection, and at all the states, because we have to take into account kind of competition for electrons and other state policies and how those policies are being met to come up with a realistic vision for Oregon. And one of the things that this model, and this is pretty typical of this kind of model, does is it assumes that resources are being dispatched efficiently across the Western footprint. And that is very different from what we see today. And so I think that we likely in part underestimate how much transmission needs to be built because we have that optimization. Essentially, it's an argument for why it makes sense to move towards a regional transmission organization, because then we would run the sort of giant machine that we have in the Western region. It really is one interconnected machine that we manage piece by piece rather than as a whole, and that leads to inefficiencies. I would say that the Bonneville question is one for the policy working groups and for discussions with Bonneville, to be perfectly honest, because it gets pretty detailed pretty quickly. We don't assume in the modeling, we have the starting point of who owns which lines. And so you could extrapolate from there who's investing in which lines, but we don't explicitly have that as an output from the model.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Gamba and Edith. I see that we have several more hands up. Unfortunately, I don't know what order the hands went up. So I'll start with Commissioner Lim.
Oh, thank you. I just have one question. Again, really interesting and in-depth work. I'm trying to relate what you're telling us at a high level to what we were previously talking about. And I'm wondering, it seems to me a lot of the new federal administration is showing a change or a policy reversal, especially related to renewable energy efforts. And I'm wondering if there's a way to think about like, what if the pace of implementation of renewables or electric vehicles slows down? And in contrast with that, how far we can get in terms of energy efficiency. And especially if you're thinking about the total amount of electricity demand, sort of whether there's a way to sort of slice it to say, well, how far can we get in terms of energy efficiency as compared with renewables? And that might cut across sectors, but just kind of the thought question for you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like you just climbed into my head because these are the kinds of questions that I'm asking myself and that we're asking our working group. So there's no simple answer to this because we don't really know. I will say that in the reference scenario, we tested really quite aggressive energy efficiency, and that includes electrification. I think that what we might need to think about is how we do with less in terms of funding, because of the federal funding might dry up, federal support for things like heat pump adoption, not to mention kind of supply chain challenges. So I think that in a way, the modeling kind of shows us how much we can get with energy efficiency, and it's a lot. It doesn't take away the need to build more on the supply side, but it reduces how much we need to build. In our working groups, we're hearing quite a lot about resilience and microgrids and other ways to kind of beef up local energy, kind of distributed energy production as well. So I'm kind of mentioning more the list of issues that we're talking about rather than a solution. But I would say that any insights, any studies, anything that anybody's working on in kind of at a local or city level would be really valuable for us as we think through this, because I think we want to be helpful in the recommendations that we set. And I think the recommendations fall in 3 buckets. One is what do we have in place that we might want to beef up or grow? What might we need that's new that we don't have? And what might we just need to study more? And I think for that, what do we, I almost feel like there's a part B that didn't used to be there on what do we have today that we might want to beef up? It's like, what do we have today that we might want to supplement to keep it at the level it is at today? So sorry for the long response, but very good question.
Thank you, Commissioner Lem and Edith. That's very helpful. Commissioner Garcia.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. This is very informative. You mentioned workforce analysis. I'm wondering, is that based on like the clean energy, like a broad workforce, or is that kind of based on those 4 pillars you mentioned, the energy efficiency, electrification, clean energy, forgetting the last one, but could you explain a little more on that workforce development study?
So the job study takes the results from the model and looks at the kind of direct, indirect, and induced jobs that we can expect to, it's kind of a net analysis. So it looks at job loss and job growth in different sectors. It's focused on the energy sector. So it does kind of look at the jobs under each of those or within each of those 4 pillars. And then kind of evaluates what happens to those jobs over time. And then the follow-on analysis from that would be, okay, here's what we see, where we see the biggest job growth, and what do we need to do in terms of training up that workforce? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia and Edith. Commissioner Dodson.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. Just 2 quick questions. One was, you had a couple of very good slides that explained how electrification reduces overall energy demand, even as the electricity demand itself grows, and that there's also benefits of reducing volatility in prices from other energy sources. Can you share information about supply? Because obviously that we didn't really get into the, I mean, you indicated growth in demand for electricity. What does that mean as far as what we would expect in the state or participation in regional markets. And then the second question is just you're moving into a recommendation phase. I assume that all those recommendations will be beyond just what Odo does. They'll be statewide. Will they also include recommendations that go beyond sort of governmental action, or will include local government recommendations as well? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Dotson. Great questions. So on the supply side, we did focus quite a lot on the supply side. And when we have that doubling of the electricity sector, we see one output from the model that I didn't show is the growth in different resources and what those resources are. I can't remember the exact figure in megawatts or megawatt hours, but I can say that it's largely wind and solar. And we also see, based on today's price projections, quite a lot of enhanced geothermal, which is an emerging technology. And so it's further down the road that you would see it. So we don't know whether that's what we'll end up seeing, but that was an interesting conclusion from the study. We also kind of took the NREL estimates for the footprint per megawatt of wind or solar and how much land area it tends to take up. So we have a kind of a broad idea of the total land use footprint as well, without saying where that's going to go. But those are the kinds of insights that we get on the supply side. We also did look quite a lot at the supply side on the fuel side of things, and there you pretty quickly start to get into those emerging technologies about 10 years out. And so that was another part of the analysis that we looked at quite a bit. On the regional markets, I mean, we didn't look at markets. That would be a separate study, but I think that it is an interesting insight to see when we run the model with kind of optimized system operations around the region. There's some really big benefits, I think, in terms of sharing resources better. And that's something that I know that various agencies in the state are engaging in on a regional level because we feel that it's really important to do that better. The recommendations will certainly go beyond Odo's purview. It's an energy strategy for the state. We're working really closely with other agencies so that we can kind of collectively think about what the most impactful recommendations would be and how to build on existing work that's already happening and not duplicate that work. So we're trying to be smart about it. I don't know that we have an answer for how much we would go beyond kind of a state level and whether we would go more to community level. But I think that we'll have to in some places, because when we start talking about vehicle miles traveled reductions in particular, the whole conversation in the working groups has really been about urban planning. And so that's just an important element that we have to figure out what we're going to do with that, with those discussions that we've had and how they translate into policy recommendations.
I would add one more thing to what Edith said, which is all great stuff, in that the supply portfolio also includes a lot of energy efficiency that's embedded in the model. Plus, we add in different technologies that get the system more efficient, more energy efficient. For instance, heat pumps make the system more efficient. EVs make the system more efficient. And there's other technologies that get chosen in the least cost model plan that increases the energy efficiency of the whole system in Oregon.
Thank you, Alan. Any other quick question for Edith? I don't see any hands. Alan, maybe you can help me. Okay. Well, thank you, Edith. That was fascinating. The slides that talked about the shift in uses was fascinating, and so great to see the work that's happening, and I'm glad that the work that the commission did was able to provide some input and help to this really important work. So thank you. So our next speaker also has a time constraint. So I'm going to propose that we go to the legislative update and then circle back to the federal funding, because I think there were a couple of additional questions and comments that I want us to connect back with. But Christy, I'll turn it over to you to give us kind of an update on how things are going in the legislature.
Thank you. And yes, thanks for putting up with my time constraint. My name is Christy Splitt. I'm the Government Relations Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Energy. And along with my colleague, Wendy Simons, we also track just general climate legislation throughout each legislative session. She usually does the vast majority of that, to be totally candid. But I'm glad to be here today and give a little update on where we are with the legislative session and kind of how climate is faring generally, and really hoping the bulk of our time can be a conversation. There are a lot of folks who are on the line who work really closely with the legislature and will have certainly more to add. So Wednesday was a big day in the legislature, as most of you know. It was the deadline for bills to move out of committee in their chamber of origin. House bills, for example, go off to Ways and Means or the Senate. Senate bills go off to Ways and Means, the Budget Committee, or the House. And a few bills will move along to another policy committee to which deadlines don't apply, like Joint Transportation, Revenue, or Rules, to give a few examples. For the next month or so, all eyes will be focused on those bills without a price tag moving through that second chamber committee process, as well as floor votes that are happening now on those bills that just came out of committee, and then will be happening along the way on these bills that are coming out of the second chamber committee. Then after the revenue forecast on May 14th, agency budgets and then the bills that do have a price tag will start to move through the process in Ways and Means, depending on available resources. And I'd say, and I'm open to hear from others, very open to hear from others who also closely work in the legislature and may have a different perspective, but I'd say the general expectation is that there will not be a large appetite for bills moving out of Ways and Means that have an impact on the state budget, even if there are more resources available to spend this biennium in the May forecast. I'd say the federal dynamics related to both impacts on state funding, like for healthcare or education, and then the general trend in the economy seem likely to lead to a desire to sort of build up reserves, just in case the economic picture for the state budget in the future is not as rosy as it might be right this minute. We can go to the next slide. I also wanted to share a few themes that Chair McDonald and I've noted about this session. A few bills that we've tracked related to climate change did not make it through committee in the first chamber, including bills that had more momentum in past sessions. And then there were also some bold new climate concepts, like a climate superfund bill following in the footsteps of Vermont and New York that didn't make it out of committee. So just definitely a note there that you might have, that bill had a lot of support from the climate activist community. So you might hear some consternation about some of those bills not going anywhere. There are more bills this session overall. Hundreds more were pre-session filed, and despite stated goals to move fewer bills to Ways and Means this year, given those budget dynamics I mentioned, it does feel like more bills are still alive post deadlines than usual. I can't do a great check yet because I think there's still some stragglers getting moved around behind the scenes, like things that came out of committee on Wednesday that still show that they're in committee, for example. But that's the general vibe I take, is just we're dealing with kind of more bills than usual, even now after deadlines. And then finally on the themes, every session, many placeholders get introduced. You'll see them, they look like vague study bills. My favorite is transportation always says studying speed bumps. So if you ever see a study of speed bumps, that's like clearly a placeholder. For us, it's usually directs the Department of Energy to study energy. So ours is a less funny, but we always get a lot of those floating around. And sometimes those bills get amendments and move through the process, although often they don't. We saw one of these successfully move with a last-minute amendment that makes changes to the EV rebate program, and that moved on to that Joint Transportation Committee, a policy committee that's still open. We also saw another one get a hearing and not move that would have made changes to strengthen the enforcement of House Bill 2021, the state's clean electricity standard. So it's good to always keep an eye on those placeholders. They make me nervous all session long for a reason, although this time neither of them were directed at us, so I'll take that one. And then also just to share some updates on bills that you have heard about here. One of those bills I mentioned that's had momentum in the past but didn't even get scheduled for a hearing in committee was the state greenhouse gas reduction goals bill, House Bill 3744. The transmission package has had a bit of a mixed fate, and you're going to hear more about that later. So I feel like I will not steal the thunder from the transmission conversation to come. You can find out which of these bills moved and which didn't a little bit later. And then the Oregon Transportation Reinvestment Package, which is now using the cute acronym TRIP, was released as a draft just recently. The co-chairs of Joint Transportation released a draft approach on this package, which we all know is coming. And we'll just see from here what happens with that draft and how it changes and morphs over time. There is not a bill number associated with it at this point. It might be added into an existing bill. It could be a new bill that is released by the Speaker and the Senate President, who have the ability to release bills in different ways this late in the legislative session. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over for questions, but also really want to get the commission talking about their work in the legislature. So we can go to the next slide.
Can I just ask one quick
Go
question?
ahead.
Is there
Of
a
course.
place that people can find that draft
I
transportation?
can pop, yeah, there's an OPB article about it. I can grab that and pop it into the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So with that said, would love to hear from any of you all about what you are thinking about, which bills you're tracking, or that you want to make sure commission members are aware about and thinking about, what questions you have about specific bills, and what themes relative to climate you are seeing play out this session.
And also, if you have clarifying questions for Christine.
And any questions for me, fine too. And then maybe I can't see hands up as well with the
I see Representative Gamba.
Great.
Hey, thanks, Christy. Just one slight clarification. The climate goals did actually get a hearing. It just didn't get a work session.
Yeah.
Oh, it didn't get a work session. Thank you. Thank you. That is, I knew that.
Yeah, that's
right. I said it
It
wrong.
was, the chair decided that there was just too much opposition to the bill.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. I did not mean to say hearing. Because I remember the hearing.
One of the things I'd like to follow up with you on, Representative Gamba, and I'm sure Christy would too, is just what can we do in the next year to maybe change the outcome next time, and how should we be thinking about that? But
Yeah, I look forward to that conversation.
great. Commissioner Garcia.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview. One bill that I have been following that I think came up in 2023, a similar one, but HB 3365, which directs the State Board of Education to include an interdisciplinary approach to sustainability and climate change. So thinking about having climate change in school curriculum come from a place where, you know, high school, that K through 12 is really the core education, and going over to, you know, higher education or community college isn't always an opportunity. So making sure that there is that climate change science and knowledge in school curriculum has always been, I think, really important. So I am interested to see how that goes this year. I know it had a hearing and I believe a work session, so I'm interested to see what happens there.
And Commissioner Garcia, you are cutting in and out a little bit, so I don't know, Christy, if you were able to hear that full
I
comment.
was able to hear it. I didn't hear a question necessarily, but just a statement about something that we should all be tracking. But maybe I missed a question.
Oh no, yeah, sorry about cutting in and out. Yeah, I was just mentioning that one, HB 3365.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and it's definitely come up in the past, and yep, we'll see what happens this time.
Other questions or comments relative to these questions or others?
Somebody did put into the chat, interested in funding for heat pump deployment programs. Just a flag that that's a budget conversation, and we have some legislation at the Department of Energy that makes some changes to that program. That bill actually passed unanimously off the House floor, which I thought was pretty cool. But the funding is another question. And again, it just depends on availability of resources and how the legislature chooses to prioritize, either sort of holding on to funds for, concerns about what the future might hold related to the state budget, or, if there's some things that do get funded and if that would be on the list. I know it's a priority for the environmental community who testified on our budget bill extensively in support of those programs getting some more funding. It's not currently in the governor's budget or in our budget. It would be up to the legislature if they chose to add funds to those programs.
Thank you, Christy. Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. I wanted to flag a few other bills that we've been tracking and are excited to see move forward, survive the first major deadline. I mentioned some of these, I think, in our last meeting, but there are a number of bills really focused on addressing rising energy costs and continuing to support community resilience against climate impacts. So just to flag a few of those, there's Rep. Mersch's Power Act, HB 3546, that's really focused on protecting Oregon households and small businesses from energy costs associated with data centers. There's the One Stop Shop 2.0 bill, which is related to Odo's work in terms of bolstering the existing navigation program for helping Oregonians access financial incentives for heat pumps and other efficiency upgrades. I think one bill I didn't mention last time around, but we're excited to see move is focused on a thermal energy networks pilot. So helping to build out TENS, so to speak, and really leverage our existing infrastructure and workforce to support the adoption of TENS in the state, which is exciting to see. And then I appreciate, Christy, you mentioning the bill that moved out of the House Climate Committee to Joint Transportation on the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. As the transportation package moves, definitely hopeful to see continued investment in our existing rebate programs, both the OCVRP, but also our medium heavy duty incentives, which support electrification of our trucks in the state, and also help build out charging infrastructure. There's a bill that Rep. Neuron is leading on, specifically focused on electrification of school buses, that is currently slated for hearing in JCT on Tuesday, which is exciting. And then other themes that I've been picking up on, there was a lot of conversation around wildfire costs, specifically related to utilities. One of those did not move forward, the catastrophic wildfire fund, but definitely anticipate that continuing to be a theme.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. I believe, Christy, you have to sign off here in a minute. Any closing comments?
Not for me. I'm always just grateful to hear what other people are observing, and just we'll be able to do another update. We do like a list that we send around to this commission, which we weren't able to do for this meeting, especially given deadlines and kind of when they fell and getting a packet out in advance. But I think we could probably work out just sending an email here in the interstitial space between meetings, giving an update on that list that we pull, just so folks can kind of peruse through it.
That's great. That would be very helpful. That was I think, a really great package that you put together for our
Definitely credit to Wendy.
Yeah.
Not me, but thanks, Wendy, for doing that. And I just volunteered us or her to do that. So we'll talk about getting something done and getting that out.
Sounds great. I think it's a great reference for us, but also for the public. So yeah, good to have that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. So now I would like to turn back to our federal discussion. And I saw a couple of hands up when we were talking about it. Director Bateman, I think you had your hand up and wanted to make some comments. I want to give you the opportunity for that before we go to public comment.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Brenda Bateman. I'm the Director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I did have a couple of updates for the group on our federal funding. I think first we would note that we're keeping an eye on what's going on at NOAA. We don't have any solid announcements from them yet that specifically concern our agency or our budget. But NOAA funding does implicate about a dozen or so of our staff members, almost our entire coastal team. And we have heard that NOAA is being asked to plan for up to 50% cuts within their own agency. So we know for certain that will have a domino effect, affecting both our staff funding as well as our program funding. But we've not heard formally yet what that might mean for us. So that's something to come. I'm sure we'll talk more about it next time. What we have heard with more certainty was an announcement this past week with regard to FEMA that is planning to cancel its BRIC program. So that's the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And this is pre-disaster planning. This is really the work that we do to position ourselves, knowing that we'll continue to have extreme events coming our direction in the coming years, and it's to help both the state and its local jurisdictions position themselves for such events. That program is being canceled. The implications of that is that both the state and its local jurisdictions must have natural hazard mitigation plans in place and updated, or they will not be eligible for funding when disaster does strike. So this is a really important piece to maintain and keep in place, and the funding to ensure that will be going away. The BRIC program for us here in Oregon is a new program, tranche of funds every year that lasts for 5 years. So we're constantly in the middle of rolling programs. And right at the moment, we are spending down and working on our BRIC 2021 grants that help us with, let's see, a number of things, mostly natural hazards mitigation plans. Most of those dollars have already been spent down or drawn down. We have just a little bit left there. And then we've started into our 2022 grant funds already as well. Most of those have yet to be drawn down, but we do believe in both of those cases, 2021 and 2022, that we'll continue to be able to see funds through our reimbursement program. Those contracts have been awarded. We believe they're solid. It's the next phased programs that are of concern and we know will be canceled. So that's the BRIC 2023 and BRIC 2024. And unfortunately, those were earmarked really specifically for local named jurisdictions and projects that they were counting on. So those will directly affect our partners in Columbia County, Umatilla County, and the Burns Paiute Tribe for BRIC 2023. And for BRIC 2024, that will directly affect Coos Union and Wallowa counties and the natural hazards mitigation work that they were planning to do there. So those will be and have been canceled. And that's all we know from FEMA at this point. But it's not good news. We're quite disappointed, and it means that we're less well positioned to prepare for events in the future.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Although it's hard to hear all of that. And I did want to thank you, your staff. We had an opportunity to meet with your client, all of your different climate folks, and learn about all of the both mitigation and adaptation work that is happening through at DLCD, which was very impressive. And really, I think there are some good opportunities for us to shine some lights on that with the folks that follow our commission. And we'll be following up with you about future agenda topics. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, Chair, for taking that time with us. Chris Shirley on our staff has been working as an interagency coordinator in this space for many years. I think most of the agencies here know her and her work very well. And we have programs with regard to both mitigation and adaptation. So we appreciated your spending the time with us.
Absolutely. It was actually very uplifting because I just spent an hour hearing a lot about some of the changes that are coming in the Forest Service. So it was uplifting to hear. So I appreciated it. I also saw Commissioner Thorndike's hand was up.
Yeah, thanks. That's always great to hear from Director Bateman from my old OWEB days. It's lovely. But speaking of OWEB, it's kind of a question for sort of related to the comments made about the NOAA funding, but going back to funding in the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund monies and sort of where are we in that tranche for OWEB? I mean, it's a significant chunk of federal funding related to salmon stuff, and we're talking about natural lands and estuaries and things like that. So I was sort of curious as to where that is and what's being anticipated.
I think Deputy Director Page had to drop off.
Okay.
I think what I heard was that it's still moving forward, but with uncertainty. But
Okay.
I
should add that in my history on OWEB, there were at least 2 administrations where the president's budget has zeroed it out and we still got it. So of course, that was in a normal sort of process. So we'll kind of see what happens.
we can follow up with Director O'Brien or Deputy Director Page.
Great, thanks.
Great. Any other comments folks want to make on that topic before we go to public comment? The only other comment I wanted to make is, we were talking a lot about the impacts to climate related work in that topic. The other big area of change that's happening is a reversal of momentum that I think we've been just starting to see play out on equity. And I know our commission's always been dedicated to really thinking about how we could advance equitable climate action. So that's the other big change that is weighing on my mind as well. Don't see any other hands up.
Chair McDonald.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Chair McDonald. Just this is Gabriella Goldfarb, Oregon Health Authority. Oh, and I'm sorry, there was I think Jessica Watson with ODFW had her hand up before me. Sorry.
That's okay. You go ahead, and then we'll go to Jessica.
Yeah. No, just we in public health are already have cuts that have been imposed and that are causing us to pause for now while legal action goes forward. Funding to partners, but very directly, specifically climate and health funding from the CDC is what we're using to provide a lot of technical support to the 36 counties across the state that are preparing climate and health resilience plans focused on particularly extreme heat and wildfire smoke, for example. So, and prioritizing equity. And we have, before they were all dismissed, because mostly all of the staff who we were working with sent us emails on April 1st saying that this was the last that we were going to be hearing from them. The CDC colleagues, they previously had identified terminology, and we had all gotten, executive order emails from CDC specifically about diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender issues, things like that. So it is having an impact, and the governor's office is coordinating our agency's response and all the agency's responses, but it is already having effects.
Thank you, Gabriella. And we'll go to Jessica, who's here on behalf of Director Colbert at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, thanks, Chair McDonald. And I just want to express Director Colbert's apologies for not being able to be here in person. And I just wanted to not belabor it, but add, in ODFW, we're in a similar space to our sister agencies who've provided updates. I'd share that, ODFW current grants and contracts are continuing to be able to draw funds. But again, like others, we're more worried about future grants and contracts in terms of whether funds will be available and whether there'll be sufficient federal staffing to support getting those out the door to agencies like ours and to, some of our grantees, similar to OWEB, who also depend on those for match funds for some of our grant programs. So we're sitting in a very similar space, but just wanted to express that to the group.
Thank you, Jessica. And one thing I would like to hear back from the fund agencies as to whether or not there are any impacts to some of the investments that we have made and projects that are part of the Natural and Working Lands Fund, but we can take that offline and talk about it in June.
Definitely.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. So let's go ahead and go to public comment. I'm not sure we explained how people can raise their hand to make public comment at the top of the meeting. So if Jan, if you could tell people how you want them to let us know that they want to provide public comment, that'd be great.
Chair, this is Jeff Crook. I think if there are attendees on the call currently who would like to make public comment, please raise your hand and we will view that and promote you to be able to speak.
Thank you, Jeff. Megan Kemple. Someone could unmute Megan Kemple. Jeff, can you help with that?
Yes, I am looking for Megan as you speak. Not seeing her on the list.
She's at the top of my list of the attendees.
Thank you. Megan, can you speak, please?
Looks like she's still muted. Oh.
Hello, this is Megan.
There we go. Thank you, Megan. Welcome.
Chair McDonald and members of the commission. I'm Megan Kemple, Executive Director with Oregon Climate and Agriculture Network. ORCAN is an active member of the Natural Climate Solutions Coalition, which has been very engaged in implementation of the Natural Working Lands Fund and in advocating for renewal of those funds. The last rollout of the Natural Working Lands Fund took a long time from our perspective. For example, awards for one of the competitive grants funded by the Natural Working Lands Fund won't be approved until July of 2025, more than 2 years after the legislature created the fund. The fund approval process is quite involved, including coordinated proposals by 4 natural resource agencies, approval by the commission, and expenditure limitation approval by the legislature. Following that, there's work by the agencies to stand up programs. We're optimistic that funding will be renewed by the legislature, and we understand that the commission and agencies and the governor's office are working on a process and timeline in preparation for renewal of the funds. We hope that approval of agency proposals and distribution of the funds can happen more quickly this next round, and at the same time, a well thought out proposal by agencies with public input is also important and will take time. There are pros and cons to going as quickly as possible versus giving time for agencies to develop their proposals with public input. Either way, at the very least, we look forward to seeing a process that results in distribution of funding more quickly than last time, if that's possible. Thank you for your important role in this process.
Thank you, Megan. And you may not have been on near the top of the meeting where we talked about the public comment period that's open for public input on the next set of investments through May 2nd. And
Thank you so
we
much.
do hope to have some proposals from the agencies in July. It may slip a little bit, but hopefully they'll be able to come to us and have at least a preliminary conversation about their proposals for discussion at our July meeting. So thank you for raising that important point.
Thank you so much. I heard that update and I'll bring that to the Natural Climate Solutions Coalition opportunity for input.
Great, thank you. And appreciate all the support that coalition has had for investments in natural and working lands. I don't see any other hands up to provide public comment. Just give a okay. Seeing none, that puts us, I think, pretty close to being back on schedule, except for the fact that we haven't had a break. So I am going to propose that we take a 5-minute break and try and come back just after 11, and then we can move into our last main topic on transmission. So thank you. If folks could come on off or back on camera as you rejoin us, so we know when we have the critical mass to go forward. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started again and dive into our last major topic today, and that is transmission and transmission policy. Really pleased to have Jason Searman from the Oregon Department of Energy and Nicole Hughes who's the Executive Director of Renewable Northwest, and our very own Representative Mark Gamba, who to speak to us today on transmission and transmission policy. We had back in our report to the legislature in 2020, we made a recommendation to try and achieve completely clean electricity by 2040, which ended up kind of being enacted through House Bill 2021. And in that conversation about that recommendation, as we were developing it, the importance of transmission and regional markets in terms of making sure that we had reliable energy was really important. So this transmission topic, we've discussed it. It's been quite a while since we've discussed it, and I think I'm really glad to see the attention that it's been getting, and great to have it on our agenda. Jason's going to go ahead and kick us off with covering kind of the basics, and then we'll turn things over to Nicole. Jason?
Coming off mute, can everybody hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay. If it's helpful to stay on camera, I can try. Otherwise, if things go a little wonky with the network, I might go off camera just to do some bandwidth saving. But and it is a complicated topic, so I'm going to stick to a script just to get us through this, and maybe we'll have time for questions at the end. Otherwise, I'll just turn it probably over to Nicole. So hello, everybody. Just for the record, my name is Jason Searman. Again, I'm with the Oregon Department of Energy. I'm a senior energy policy analyst there, where I focus on the power grid. I'm happy to join today's discussion and happy to start us off with a high-level overview of why transmission infrastructure is so essential to achieving economy-wide decarbonization and how transmission can be used, planned, and paid for most efficiently. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll just say next slide, and we can advance that way. So here's a breakout of the specific topics I'll summarize to ground our discussion. Before diving in, though, the foundational context here is that technical study after technical study shows that using more clean electricity across more segments of the economy is the most efficient pathway to rapidly decarbonize. And this is why the power grid needs to rapidly expand as efficiently as possible to access and deliver more clean supplies of electricity to more customers. And similar to how roads connect our cities and transportation grid together, transmission lines are the infrastructure that connects the power grid together. So there is no networked grid without transmission. And the primary value of having a robust interconnection of roads, or transmission lines in this case, is that robust networks enable broad diversity and competition in the marketplace. So at its core, transmission infrastructure enables a broad diversity of customer demand for electricity to be served by a broad diversity of electricity supply technologies. And more diversity in supply and demand promotes more reliable, resilient, and affordable electricity service. So really at its simplest, the big picture takeaway is that transmission bolsters grid diversity and all the benefits that come with diversity. Next slide. Okay, so keeping with that analogy of how roads allow people and goods to flow around the country and enable diverse trading markets, Transmission lines allow electricity to flow across regions of the country and enable regional power markets. So what's a power market? Well, there are different ways power markets can be designed, but all power markets effectively control how the transmission system within the market footprint is used to buy and sell bulk electricity. So markets offer a contractual system that accounts for how much, where, and when electricity is injected and consumed across the grid. Contractual accounting of market transactions can help inform a basic understanding of how electricity flows across the grid, but it's important to know that power contracts and market operations don't control the actual physics of how electricity flows across the power grid. So as we can see, different regions have different market paradigms for buying and selling electricity. There are regions where a fragmented bilateral market paradigm exists, and there are regions where a centralized market paradigm exists. Where the market is fragmented, a formal mechanism doesn't exist for utilities to pool their assets together for common use and to maximize efficiencies. Utilities individually serve their customers' demand by scheduling the operation of their own generation and storage resources, and they operate their own individual transmission systems. In these bilateral markets, utilities buy and sell electricity with each other, but transactions are mostly through exactly that, bilateral contracts between just two entities. So a key aspect of the areas where fragmented bilateral markets exist is that there are more than 30 individual transmission systems across the bilateral west and more than 20 individual transmission systems across the bilateral east. So this means when utilities in the bilateral west want to buy, sell, and transfer power long distances, they often need to navigate multiple transmission systems. We can't see all those different transmission systems in the east and west here on the slide, but we can see that each of the 7 RTOs shown in color here function as a single transmission system. We have another slide that shows that the more than 30 transmission systems across the west, and when we get there, we can explore transmission service rights and the implications those have for transferring or wheeling power across multiple different transmission systems. The bottom line, though, is that buying and selling power across these multiple transmission systems requires additional processes and additional transmission costs compared to transferring power across just a single system. Next slide. Same as the other slide, just a little same graphic, but we'll explore the colored RTO footprints here. So within these footprints are the centralized power markets that are operating across the country currently, and they offer a formal structure for utilities to work together to maximize efficiencies of existing generation, storage, and transmission infrastructure. So in these centralized markets, utilities pool their customers' demand and pool their resources and transmission systems into a centralized market. And that market is operated by an independent entity. That entity schedules operations for all the participating resources. In these markets, participants buy and sell electricity by bidding into a centralized market, and the lowest cost bidders are paid to operate at the levels needed to meet the aggregated demand of all those participating utilities. So some key takeaways here: areas with centralized power markets make more efficient use of the resources and infrastructure compared to areas with bilateral markets. And in centralized markets, you have an independent entity that schedules the operation of resources, not the owners of the resources. A second takeaway is that centralized markets are a core function of RTOs, but you can also have centralized markets without participating in an RTO. Centralized markets without an RTO is what's being offered by CAISO and SPP to utilities across the West right now. And we'll talk more about this and its implications after a few more slides. Before shifting to that topic, one of the other big takeaways is that centralized markets alone, without a large enough footprint and without an RTO, don't always solve a few of the biggest challenges facing the power grid these days, which is how to plan and allocate the cost of expanding the transmission system most efficiently and cost effectively for ratepayers. Breaking this last point down a bit, in the absence of an RTO, a centralized market alone doesn't resolve the challenges of fragmented transmission planning and cost allocation. And these two challenges prevent the most efficient and cost-effective expansion of transmission infrastructure from being both planned and financed. I'll just walk through kind of the history here. It's important to remember, the grid, the transmission system here that we have today was built over the past 100 years. when modern technologies of low-cost solar, wind, and batteries weren't commercially available. Today, these technologies are often prevailing as the least cost commercially available resources that can be built quickly to meet surging demand, keep the lights on, and achieve clean energy and climate goals as fast and as cheap as possible. And their costs are projected to continue to decline as their global and domestic market shares increase. And so there are many signs pointing to the need to expand transmission infrastructure into locations with low-cost wind and solar. And the RTO paradigm does more to help address fragmented transmission planning and cost allocation challenges than a standalone centralized market. And this is because in an RTO, you have the centralized market, but you also have that same independent entity that runs the centralized market. They also conduct centralized transmission planning for the entire market footprint. And centralized transmission planning across large footprints helps maximize efficient use of existing infrastructure and minimize the need for additional expansion. Centralized planning can also help identify larger projects that benefit customers of many utilities. So in other words, when it comes to larger projects, it's harder for one utility to identify all the benefits for customers of other utilities. And this makes it harder to monetize the value and allocate the costs of larger projects to all the customers who benefit from them. And with less certainty around benefits and cost allocation, it's difficult to secure the financing necessary to build larger transmission projects that could provide more value. Next slide. So here, as promised, we can see the more than 30 fragmented transmission systems across the West. We can also see how large BPA's transmission system footprint is across the Pacific North region up there in the upper left. So with the benefit of this map, it's probably easy to visualize the big key takeaway that I'm stressing here, which is outside the RTOs, multiple transmission systems are often barriers to accessing distant and diverse low-cost generation. This is because you have to navigate multiple processes to acquire transmission service rights to transfer or wheel, as they say in the industry, power across multiple different transmission systems. Each transmission system charges individual and unique transmission service rates, and these different rates then stack on top of each other like pancakes. So some in the room may have heard the term pancake rates. That's essentially what that means. You're layering these rates on top of each other, which can cause the wheeling power long distances to be really cost prohibitive. Another key takeaway is that each transmission system conducts its own individual transmission planning. The main point of this slide, though, is to help us appreciate the implications of fragmented transmission systems, which you can see over there on the left, and contractual transmission service rights. So I'll walk through an example of transmission service rights. So within each balancing authority area, if you want to hit next for me, we can go through a Bonneville example. So each balancing authority area are transmission lines. You can click again, please. Put some lines in there for us. So we'll first imagine a BPA owned line, okay? 500 kilovolts is about as big as they get. We have big lines in the Northwest to get all the power from our big hydro resources across the region and into other regions. And so when you have these transmission lines that are owned like BPA here, the owners can sell transmission service rights to different entities to transfer electricity across the power line. So if you click again, we'll try to look inside this power line. I'm just figuratively, right? If we imagine looking into this large 500 kV line, or better yet, if we looked into BPA's transmission service records, right, we'd see multiple entities holding unique transmission service rights on this line or pathway. If you click again, we'll kind of just peek inside and we'll see. So this is totally just an example, but BPA could retain, for example, transmission service rights for half of the line's total capacity. And then PGE might acquire some of that capacity, and so could other independent generators. So that's kind of the takeaway, just to see how all these little pieces of the pie kind of break down and fragment. And you can go through another example quick if you just want to click through. I just put another a PacifiCorp example, right? That's another big balancing authority area in the West. They own and operate a lot of 500 kV lines. Yeah, you got it. Just take a peek in that line if you want. You can see how these arrangements of transmission service rights are going to be different across all these lines and across all these balancing authorities. But these transmission service rights basically allow entities to transfer power from point A to point B, or they can sell them to other folks. So in a wheeling example, right, a bilateral contract selling solar power from Arizona to Seattle or Portland, for example, that could require transferring power across 3 to 4 or more of these different transmission systems, resulting in the need to acquire these transmission service rights from 3 to 4 or more different transmission service providers, all at different rates, all stacking on top of each other. And this fragmented system of contractual service is in contrast to how transmission service functions in a centralized power market or an RTO. In a centralized power market, the transmission service rights held by market participants, they're all pooled together and they're made available to transfer power long distances between all the market participants. So, the key takeaway here is that centralized markets, you have the sharing and donating of transmission rights, and that effectively eliminates the costly wheeling charges and pancake rates that often prevent more low-cost clean electricity from being added to the grid. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here we'll explore the centralized market concept that we've talked about with CAISO. They have an EDAM centralized market, and SPP has a Markets Plus centralized market. So this slide will help us explore the footprints and how those matter with respect to where it's sunny and where it's windy, which is where our low-cost solar and wind resources are. And frankly, the biggest value markets can provide is providing customers and ratepayers with increased access to these areas where there's more low-cost clean electricity. So where is it sunny? I just got a little cute here. You can just click through if you want, a few clicks and get some stuff on the map there, sprinkled Bob Ross style, right? We've got some solar in the southwest, solar in the Intermountain area. Our strong wind is in the upper North Great Plains, where it's sunny and windy, kind of like the little treasure chest of renewables is down in that southern Great Plains area in Texas and Oklahoma. And then, of course, the Pacific Northwest has some high quality resources of our own. We have all this abundant clean hydropower, and we also have West Coast offshore wind down along our southern border. California is working on accessing this as a new technology, but that's essentially our map, right? And so we have questions to ask and answer about market footprints, right? What's the size and shape of those footprints relative to where all these resources are at? So first, is a market footprint big enough to maximize the diversity of low-cost clean electricity serving ratepayers? Is that footprint big enough to ensure markets are bigger than the weather to mitigate the risks of energy shortfalls during extreme events? Of course, largest footprints are best for accessing diverse resources. So 2 footprints for different centralized markets across the West are likely to provide less diversity than 1 larger footprint. The second aspect of these footprints is, does the market have a contiguous footprint, or are there gaps in the footprint that create transmission seams? Maybe people have heard the term seams. You want to avoid gaps as much as possible because they create these seams. And it might sound like a new term, right? Transmission seams, what is that? But that kind of relates to the wheeling examples I walked us through, right? If you're trying to transfer power across different transmission systems and you encounter a seam, that's just basically saying where one footprint ends and another begins. And then, you're going to have to maybe pay 2 different transmission rates to go across that seam. That's one of the big reasons, more important facets of seams. There's other complications like administrative rules and greenhouse accounting, and all these things change when you go from market to market, but the transmission costs can stack on top of each other. And if we just want to walk through these 3 examples here, I'm getting close to finishing up here.
Jason, you are a little over time, and I do want to make sure
Okay.
from the other 2 speakers. So just go through
So this is it, just simply like this is taken from a study. You see one big contiguous EDAM footprint that's just got 1 seam. Go through the next, you'll see a discontiguous footprint, right? You're gonna have more seams challenges. And then the biggest footprint is the last one, I think. There's no seams, it's the largest, it's the most contiguous. And then I think we're pretty much, I can wrap up. I think that's it. I did have a slide here that had just had some additional information about it for folks who are interested more on that transmission planning and cost allocation topic. And we can always come back to these. So for now, I'll just wrap up and turn it over.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it. Now I think we'll turn it over to Nicole. Thank you for joining us today. And you're going to help us also deepen our understanding of the importance of transmission and some of the issues.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My first time presenting here. I'm Nicole Hughes. I am the Executive Director of Renewable Northwest. We're a 4-state clean energy advocacy organization that does work in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. We do a variety of activities around clean energy advocacy, including planning at the state regulatory agencies, policy at the state legislatures, and markets and transmission. Basically, all the work that Jason just talked about is stuff we're engaged with. And the good news is he gave a really good overview, so I don't need to do, there's some overlap between what we have here, so I can shorten my talk a little bit down. So next slide, please. Sounds like you know what transmission is, but I just always have to caveat that we're not talking about the poles and wires you see outside your house. We're talking about the big transmission that is going long distances. So next slide, please. Okay, all of a sudden, everybody wants to talk about transmission, and that is for a very good reason. Across the country, we are seeing that the lack of investment in our transmission system over the last 20 years has caught up with us. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I won't go into all the reasons why we got to where we're at now, but we're in a bad place now, and we need to start investing soon to avoid some pretty drastic impacts to customers. Next slide, please. So this is a chart here that shows load growth over several years, and you can see that, you know, pretty much for the last like at least 20 years, we've had very minimal load growth in our region. And then just in the last couple of years, we've had significant load growth. Electrification was the #1 thing driving this load growth. You know, that's something that we have advocated for here in Oregon as part of the climate change solutions. Also, large technology manufacturing and data centers coming to our region. And another good news story is onshoring of manufacturing. That was something that was that began under the Biden administration's strategy, and we're hoping that that continues, though there may be challenges going forward. And then I'd say sort of, you know, in some places, not quite yet in our region, we haven't seen a ton of load growth, but the clean energy transition will cause you know, some changes to the electricity dynamic, but those are sort of the factors that have been driving load growth in our region. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide here. So most people, when they think about transmission, they're only really thinking about the mechanism of taking electricity from one place to another, and they don't think about transmission in the way that we do, which is this: there are multiple benefits of transmission. So I really appreciated Jason's analogy of the highway system. If you have a highway that you rely on to bring goods to customers, and all of a sudden that highway gets wiped out by a landslide, you're going to need to figure out how to get those goods to customers a different way, and it's likely going to cost more. So electricity, just like all other commodities, it follows the basics of supply and demand economies. So when there are constraints on the delivery of electricity to consumers, costs increase. Oregonians have been experiencing double-digit rate increases over the last couple of years. The two primary factors that have been driving these thus far include high gas prices. We had the highest gas prices in the nation last year. And then second is capacity constraints on our transmission system. Going forward, those cost hikes will be exacerbated by other things, including wildfire liability risk and more growth in high energy use tech industry here, and further capacity constraints on the transmission system, which are aggravated by that load growth. So having multiple transmission lines that can deliver power to customers is a cost savings benefit. this graph here, this was from a Brattle study that is linked in the bottom if you want to take a look at the full study. It's a study that talks about the multiple benefits of transmission. But what they did in this study was they had multiple case studies in different states where they looked at the cost of transmission, the levelized cost, so what it would cost to build transmission versus the economic benefits. And in all cases across the board, the cost of investing in transmission was far less than the economic value of the transmission that was brought to consumers. So the theory is if you have more transmission, you have more options to bring electricity to consumers. It helps abate those costs to consumers. Some of the other benefits of transmission that were identified in the study are listed here. Reliability and resource adequacy benefits. Again, it helps make sure that the electricity is available when you need it the most. Capacity savings. So we have, as we transition into more variable generators on the system, we need to make sure we have the capacity when we need it, and having more transmission solutions helps with that. Environmental benefits. Jason talked about how new transmission was needed for the clean energy transition under times of constraint, as you'll see in future slides. We may be forced to be procuring not the cleanest energy at the time that we want it. So that's something we have to keep an eye on. Market facilitation, like Jason talked about, is easier when there's more transmission paths. And then all the public policy benefits to help meet some of our desires in Oregon to have electrification, expand more, electric cars. All of that is going to put a constraint on the electricity system. So we'll need more transmission to serve that. And then, of course, economic growth is important. And I think it's really salient in Oregon right now because one of our largest tech companies has been challenged in some of their growth potential because of the lack of transmission to bring electricity to their work. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes wrong when we don't have the adequate transmission. I think, was there a previous slide that was missed? There we go. Okay. In January of 2024, last year, you may remember we had extreme cold and power outages, and it was kind of a mess. I was without power for 7 days, but we're not going to go down that route. Anyway, this had extreme impacts on the costs of electricity in our region. Next slide, please. As you can see from the image on the left here, Oregon relies on both imports and exports of electricity to sort of balance out our needs. We do import quite a bit of solar from the desert Southwest and wind from Wyoming, and we export hydro. I'd say one thing I would add to this slide over the last couple of years is in California, they've built out a massive slew of batteries, around 10 gigawatts. And this last winter, those batteries helped us out. Those batteries abated costs for us many times. And so those connections between our partners that have these resources is super important. On the right, you can see this was during the winter event. Some of the flow of the costs, people in the desert Southwest were making quite a bit of money off of selling power to us during that time period. And we were really in a massive deficit. Next slide, please. This is just an image of electricity prices across the country during that January event. And you can see that our region was hurt the worst by that. And this is 100% related to the transmission constraints on our system. Now, knowing that these extreme weather events are going to continue, it is in the best, it's best for consumers if we do our best to make sure we have multiple transmission paths to prevent this from happening again. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the state's role? What can Oregon do in this dynamic? So we'll talk about three things: planning, permitting, and paying. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Jason mentioned, planning for transmission is currently done on a utility by utility basis. So utilities are looking at what do my consumers need here in this moment. They're not looking at what does the state need or what does the region need. And that just narrows the view of how investments are made. It also tends to not consider the multiple benefits of transmission. Most of these multiple benefits of transmission that I talked about occur when you see transmission crossing state lines and regional boundaries, where you're able to bring in a diversity of resources across a larger footprint. Also, we see when things are done on a utility by utility basis, massive queue backlogs because people are competing for a small chunk of transmission in different places, and those aren't talking to each other. In the permitting realm, this is something that's really important for Oregon to think about. We do have some duplicity between our state and federal processes. It's complicated to try and work those out, but I think there are efforts in the legislatures having conversations around some of those right now. I don't think there's going to be a bill that passes that solves those problems, but we'll want to put a pin into continuing having those conversations going forward. Other things that we've noticed in our analysis is, we think it's really important to try and upgrade the existing transmission lines that we have at our disposal before we try and build new ones, because we know that's hard, but there really is not a lot of incentive for utilities to do that. We can think of a number of things that could help, and I think Rep. Gamba will talk a little bit about some of that when he speaks. But also, we want to encourage the use of existing right-of-ways. So we can ask for some special permitting privileges for transmission lines that are built in existing right-of-ways to help smooth the path towards a permit. That would help significantly. There really is no entity in Oregon that is looking at transmission from the perspective of the economic growth of the state and acknowledging all the multiple benefits that it plays for consumers. So that's something we should keep an eye on. And I think finally, the permitting piece is complicated, and communities often are not seeing or understanding or realize the benefits associated with it. On the cost allocation piece, because planning is done on a utility by utility basis, the costs of investment are allocated across a smaller number of customers. We think there are tools that could be used to broaden the scope and the benefits of transmission, and also broaden the cost allocation of those. So you have spreading those costs over a larger number of consumers. There really are only a couple different methods of getting transmission financed right now. And we were working with Representative Gamba this session on a concept that we thought would offer a unique opportunity to bring in some new finance options. Unfortunately, that bill is not going to pass. That's disappointing, because now we will be the only state on the West Coast that doesn't have an entity like this. And there are 7 other states in the United States that have this and been thinking about it. It really puts Oregon at a disadvantage on this issue. And then again, the regulatory process just doesn't make the right financial incentives or awards to upgrading and using new technologies on existing transmission lines. So something else we should be thinking about. Next slide, please. I saw at the last slide that Jason showed, he had some things that were happening in the region that you might want to know about. One is West Tech. This was a West-wide effort to create a transmission planning program that sort of did a more regional approach and identified the multiple benefit transmission paths. So that's underway. It's been slow to kick off because it's been challenged with some funding issues. And then some states, which I'll talk about on the next slide, are taking steps to do their own planning and their own coordination with other states. I think it's going to be really important for Oregon to consider reform to some of the land use permitting processes to prioritize critical infrastructure. we think it's time for an audit of our state permitting process related to transmission and to see if there's anything that we could do to relieve the backlogs. The current project that's being planned in Oregon, it'll take about 20 years to get permitted. And from our perspective, that is not acceptable. And it is actually, we'll be seeing the impacts of those kind of backlogs on building new transmission pretty realistically for consumers. And then another solution we thought of again was a state transmission authority, which I spoke about, that could kickstart investment in transmission where others can't. So there are a lot of places where a utility is just not their service territory, or there's just not something that they see that has benefits beyond their customers, but it might have these larger benefits that we were talking about before, where it can connect to regions or connect to larger utilities. That could be a place where the state could step in and help kickstart finance for some of those things. I have BPA on here. This is a really important one. BPA was already struggling to process their transmission queue. They have over 100 gigawatts of mostly renewable energy backlogged in their transmission queue. And they've recently announced that they just can't process those anymore. And now with their cuts to workforce, we're really unsure what the next steps are, but I think more coordination with the federal agency on this, because they do play such an outsized role in our region. They own and operate over 80% of the region's transmission, and their transmission system is one that all of our investor-owned utilities and consumer-owned utilities rely on to serve this growing demand. So that coordination is really important. And then regulatory reform to support upgrades of new technology on the existing transmission system. Next slide, please.
Nicole, just want to be mindful that we need to leave time for Representative Gamba.
Yeah, so this is my last slide really here, and that's the two states I talked about, Colorado and New Mexico, have created transmission authorities. They're working together on some intrastate or interstate transmission lines to meet multiple benefits for their consumers. It's a new approach that I think we're all really interested in seeing success for. And then the last slide is just some takeaways, if you want to go to it real quick, from the Clean Tech Task Force, where we did have a section in the document about transmission. And these are the takeaways from that the state needs to play a more outsized role in transmission. And these are the recommendations that came from that. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I had one question. What does TX stand for?
Oh, it's what we use as an acronym for transmission.
Got it. Okay, that's kind of what
I
assumed, but I just want to check. Well, then we can maybe leave this slide up if you're going to refer to some of these things, Representative Gamba, or take it down and just hear. I'd love to hear from you about the process that you led and some of the issues that came up and the solutions that you've been trying to move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, probably take it down.
Okay.
I'd rather see folks if they have their cameras on. Well, thanks for this. Nicole did a great job. Actually, both of them did a great job sort of setting the stage and helping people understand the issues. We did have a work group over the last 18 months that was focused entirely on transmission and what potential solutions at the state level are, keeping in mind that Bonneville is not an entity that is in any way controlled by state law or anything else that we do. And they are controlling 75–80% of the transmission capacity in the region. So we had, at the end, I think over 80 people in this work group. It just kept growing as engineers and lawyers and various folks got involved. Nicole was a huge part of that effort, as were several other folks on this call. In the end, we landed on 3 really relevant bills. There was a 4th that was directed at the federal government to ask the federal government to direct BPA. However, with the change at the federal government, it felt like both prudent and a waste of time to go ahead and get that bill passed. So the three that were remaining were work around grid enhancing technology, which has been touched on a couple times today. It's ways to utilize the existing system to push more energy through the existing system without having to build greenfield new transmission lines. That bill did actually pass off the House floor yesterday. So that'll move to the Senate now. It, at this point, basically directs the IOUs, which is the only entities that we can, well, they are the entities that we tend in Oregon to control. For whatever reason, we don't tend to control our COUs in any way. But the IOUs do provide the energy for the vast majority of Oregonians, and they're controlled by the PUC, who were also part of the work group. In any case, the bill requires that the IOUs be thinking about and explaining how they're intending or not intending to use grid enhancing technologies to increase the capacity on their system. We're hoping to amend it slightly in the Senate to make it also easier for them to use those technologies, reduce some of the red tape, particularly around reconductoring, which is the most powerful of all those technologies. Reconductoring has the potential to, depending on who you talk to, increase the capacity somewhere between 30 and 50% on a given line. The next bill package, or the next bill that we had, was what we called our permitting package. And it really was a hodgepodge of different policies that were attempting to trim off, again, red tape to speed up the process. That passed out of committee. We are waiting to see when that will be on the floor. When we started the work group, being aware of the load growth and the time frame of the load growth they're expecting, as well as the time frame that it's currently taking, for example, the Bonneville to Hemming, or Boardman to Hemingway project, I sort of challenged the group by saying that we need to cut a 20-year process down to a 5-year process, which was absolutely a moonshot concept, but and this permitting package gets us nowhere near there. Nicole touched on one of the reasons, and that is that our system here in the state, the FSEC system, is broadly speaking a land use process rather than a environmental process, which is what the federal government uses. So they can't run concurrently. And that would be one of the ways that we could pretty dramatically speed up this process, is to have the FERC process and FSEC running concurrently, as opposed to end-to-end interspersed with lawsuits from NIMBYs, which is going to be a major problem, period, anytime you talk about any transmission line. The last bill, and I think what was the most important bill, Nicole also touched on, which was the creating the transmission authority. And that authority would do a number of things. It would be doing statewide planning, thinking about what are the transmission needs for the state, to best help us move in our transition to green energy, as well as to ensure that our system is well integrated with the region. Another thing that it would do is to allow that entity to bond. So it would be a financing mechanism, and it would be an entity that would have eminent domain, so that it could actually do development of lines should that be necessary. It was designed to allow off-ramps for other entities to pick up a project pretty much anywhere in the process of planning, permitting, and developing. But it had the capacity to fully develop lines on its own. That bill ran into some political headwinds, a little bit of personalities, a little bit not invented here, a little bit. This is a big deal. The governor needs to be more involved than she has been. There were a lot of reasons that we couldn't quite get that bill across the line. We have been in conversation with the governor's office, and they have assured us that they will be engaged in the interim, and we'll make it a priority coming out. It's interesting, the Washington Transmission Authority to some degree spun out a little bit of our work group, the work we did, and then we asked NCEL, the National Coalition of Environmental Legislators, to hold a conference in Spokane and invited legislators from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, thinking about that regional system, and ideally that at some point those would all be part of an RTO, and got folks really well educated on what the current state of affairs were, what some of the possible solutions were, and Washington seems to be on path to pass their transmission authority. There's much work to be done. As Nicole said, we've got to sort out this issue of the FSEC process being a land use process, or we need to dramatically adjust our land use processes, one or the other, so that we can speed up the process, because it's untenable right now. It's kind of outside the realm of what utilities, I think, feel is reasonable to even try and invest in. And I think that's one of the many reasons we haven't seen the investment in transmission that one would expect, given the growth we've been seeing. I know that was a lot really fast. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Representative Gamba, and thank you for your leadership on trying to help us think creatively about solutions to our transmission needs. Any questions for any of our speakers? Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I hear from other commissioners as well. And thank you all so much. Chair McDonald, as you said at the top, this is such an important and pressing issue for us to be talking about and working to address. So just really appreciate all of your work and leadership, Rep. Gamba and Nicole, the work that Renewable Northwest is doing as well. I think you all did a really good job of underscoring the importance of regional coordination on transmission, especially given all the uncertainty at the federal level, and also BPA's evolving role in West Coast electricity markets. My sense is that states that are more proactive in taking steps now will have a greater influence in shaping a West-wide grid that's reliable and cost-effective. And I'm curious what you all see as the most important steps for Oregon to be taking to make sure we're able to inform those regional coordination efforts, and curious about how a state transmission authority might strengthen our role in helping to direct regional investments and make sure we're serving Oregon's economic and clean energy and affordability goals.
Well, one little aspect I'll touch on really quickly, and I'll let Nicole go, is that we were coordinating with the folks in the Washington legislature to try and have our two authorities be as similarly functional as possible, so that they could be very coordinated going forward, kind of thinking it as the beginning of an RTO. That, in the end, we've got to be part of a West-wide RTO, and these market decisions that Bonneville has recently made are going to make that particularly hard, I think.
Yeah, it hasn't really explicitly been said here, but I'll just say that Bonneville choosing to join a market outside the region is going to exacerbate this problem, and we are actively trying to push back against that. And the state of Oregon has actually been a leader in that conversation. The important role that Letha, Commissioner Tawney at the Utility Commission has played in these conversations around regional markets can't be understated. She has been a leader. She's seen as a leader from outside the state. Continuing to support her work doing that is critically important. And with the departure of Chair Decker, Les Perkins, Commissioner Perkins has taken over some of that work on transmission. And so supporting him to be engaged in all of these regional transmission conversations is going to be crucial. The problem is the commission can only do so much. They are, authorized to, when it comes to transmission, they play a very narrow role. They authorize the CPCN process, and that's it. And they've made it really clear that they're not open to, and they see it's a conflict of interest for them to take on additional responsibilities for transmission. I think the same thing of Odo. I think they do an amazing job of educating on the role of transmission and looking at that as it relates to things like the state energy strategy. But Odo also oversees the permitting of transmission. And so there's a little bit of a conflict for them to be engaged in promoting new transmission lines and doing financing. And so that was our idea of having a unique organization whose focus was really about the economic development piece, being able to look at things like where you site new data centers based on where we have the ability to expand transmission. Where should we be encouraging economic development in the state, knowing that we have a constrained transmission system? Having someone to be able to represent the state in the planning process at the regional level and in the cost allocation conversation that's about to come up, which is the hardest part of this whole thing, who pays for it, is going to be really important. So at a minimum, it would be our strong recommendation that the governor staffs up and has somebody at some agency that's able to, until we were able to get something like a transmission authority developed, that's going to be able to participate in those meetings. Because if we are not at the table, then Oregon consumers are not represented in these conversations.
Thank you, Representative Gamba and Nicole. We have a couple more minutes that we can take questions. I don't see any other hands up. This is, as Jason started at the beginning, it is a very complex issue. And I'm glad that we touched on markets too, because that's another really important piece. We had considered having this conversation kind of dig into both and just didn't feel like we could do justice to market. So, but it was great to hear what we did hear today about it. But we'll certainly want to circle back to a markets discussion as well as transmission at near future meetings. Commissioner After.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. Maybe one last question. I think you all really underscored just the many challenges and issues we're facing with the current system, where planning is, narrowly focused on utilities' own customers and regulatory returns, and what that means in terms of being able to serve broader regional energy needs and deliver system-wide benefits. And I really appreciate you all underscoring too how a transmission authority would help fill some of these infrastructure needs and enable new investment pathways. In addition to hopefully moving on that in future sessions, I'm curious if you all could, wave a magic wand, what additional actions, I heard that certainly addressing permitting, but anything else you all want to leave with us as we think about next steps on this issue?
I just think, the permitting piece is a problem here. Oregonians have a quite complicated relationship with development in general, and we have been privileged to have not the need to be considering this for a long time, but that has changed. And there's going to be some hard trade-offs that need to be made. And I think it's worthy conversation for the state to think about what it means for communities who are impacted by the development of this transmission to be benefiting from it. And I think it's also worthy of a conversation about how the state can help move the federal government in the right direction on transmission. Nobody who works in our industry has faith that Bonneville is going to be the provider of first resort for transmission anymore. And so if they're not going to do it, who is going to? And it's a question I don't have an answer for, but I think the state needs to be really clear about what its goals are. And if we don't, the longer we put off making these investments, the worse the costs are going to be for consumers and the worse the outcomes are going to be. We're already at a point where we're not going to be meeting our 2030 clean energy mandates, and we're starting to be concerned about 2040 and 2045 and beyond. So I just can't emphasize anymore like how important it is to today start really digging in on this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter and Nicole. Well, obviously, this topic will need to come up again and soon. I did appreciate also that I think, Nicole, you flagged the importance of storage, and that was the third leg of the stool that we talked about a couple of years ago. And the issue of permitting and land use, is another topic that we really need to dig into. Hearing more from the utilities, I think, would also benefit us to get their perspectives. But really great overview of the challenges and potential solutions. It's great to see that side by side to know where we're headed. And if we could bring the last slide, the slides back up for just the last slide of next steps. One thing I will note in next steps is, given that we have such a diverse commission, we probably need to do a better job of defining acronyms. There were a lot of places today where acronyms were used that I thought that there were probably some commissioners who wouldn't have heard those before. So we'll try and make sure that we pay more attention to that in our follow-up. Our next meeting is June 13th, and we have identified some agenda items for our discussion. We're working on a focus on an agenda on tribal climate priorities. And so we're in contact with tribes to think about how to best develop that discussion. The Tigger model that ODO is working on that will inform the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. And Tigger stands for Transformational. Remind me, Alan. Greenhouse gas emission reduction. I can't remember what the I stands for, but we developed integrated. Thank you. We developed an analysis that informed our roadmap to 2030, and ODO is going to be updating that, and so we should be able to hear about that in June. We have some natural and working land studies that are about to be kicked off, and so we'll hear about that, probably hear about a legislative discussion as well. I think the other topic that came up earlier several times was just we want to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on with changes at the federal level and how that might affect our work, whether it's funding, whether it's the staffing changes at federal agencies or the executive order and what on state climate action and what that might do. So those were the things that came, that we had talked about. I talked about with staff earlier, and also that came up during this meeting that I heard, as well as obviously, perhaps not in June, but in July, circling back to this transmission discussion, I think would be important. But are there other topics that people think are especially timely that we should put on our next agenda? Well, with that, I will close the April 11th, 2025 meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission. Just finally, the last piece, I really appreciated the chat questions that were coming up from the public and the agency staff who were answering those on the fly. So thank you for that. We do like to hear and try and answer questions, and then folks are always welcome to reach out to us if there are other questions that come up in between meetings. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your Friday and weekend. And thanks to all those that presented. It was really a fascinating meeting and discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.